Hello, I'm Michael Burke. Every year, unclaimed estates worth millions of pounds are handed over to long-lost relatives. For some people, it means a knock on the door they'll never forget.
It came as a complete and utter shock. So I thought, oh, lovely, wonderful, whoopee, £1 million, here we come.
Finding forgotten families is the job of the heir hunters. They use genealogy to locate the next of kin who are in line for unexpected windfalls.
Hi, is it Deborah?
Oh, how much money am I going to get?
I didn't realise that there was anybody in the family that we could inherit from anymore.
A visit from the heir hunters can change lives.
Meet up with all of you.
You never know when they might come knocking at your door. Heir hunting firm Celtic Research has 4 regional offices and a network of agents around the world. At their Wirral office, the team have taken a gamble with a case that needs to be solved quickly. But I'm led to believe that a project like this could have many unexpected twists and turns.
So what interested you about this case?
Well, this case had its roots in the northwest of England, which is where our regional office is based. So we really felt this one was one we should really go at full speed.
It was advertised, was it?
It was advertised by the Government Legal Department, and you look at that and you think, oh, northwest case, right, game on.
But competition?
Yes, competition always makes it tough, but you sort of have to hope that with us being based in the northwest, that we might get a bit of advantage over the others.
What did you know about the dead person?
Well, John Clench was born in the Lancastrian fishing port of Morecambe, 1925. He didn't stay in the northwest, though. He actually moved to Birmingham, lived most of his life in Birmingham, died there on the 5th of November 2009.
Did he have many assets?
Well, we weren't absolutely sure. What we thought was, looking at some records that we did find, was that he had a house which he had then sold, and he'd moved into care. About 6 years after he sold the house, he died. What we were hoping was there would be money in the bank account left over from the sale of the house.
Hoping, but you didn't know?
It's part of the risk of the job, to be honest. You look at a case and you think, well, it might be worth working, it's worth having a serious look into.
What did you have to go on?
Well, very little. We established that he had died, as I say, in 2009 in a care home, and that was pretty much it, to be honest.
The staff at the care home were the only people who had any information about John.
John was a very charming man. He really was funny. He just loved making us smile. He was ours, wasn't he? We looked after him and we loved him. Don't forget those people quickly. You know, you don't forget them quick, do you? Because of their personalities. You know, they do make an impression, don't they?
OK, that's all done.
Brilliant. Cheers.
At the start of his research, Saul was able to discover that John Clench was an only child and a widower with no children of his own. But with little more information about John to go on, Saul had to start right at the beginning.
We found John T. Clench's birth listing in Morecambe, and that showed that his mother's maiden name was Hardcastle. The next step would be to find his parents' marriage and then start looking for their births and deaths and any siblings he may have had. The problem was, I couldn't find any marriage of a Clench to a Hardcastle anywhere.
Hitting a brick wall in his research, Saul had to change tack.
So what we did was we reversed the search. Instead of looking for a Clench marriage, we looked for a mini Hardcastle marriage. And sure enough, we found Minnie Hardcastle marrying a Henry Clench. What's obviously happened here is, all those years ago in 1921, the registrar has made a simple error when he's been copying out this certificate, and he's written Clinch instead of Clench. It's sort of like the 1920s equivalent of a typo, I imagine. Once we'd resolved the issue of the mistranscription, we could then start working the paternal side quite seriously. The deceased's father, Henry Clench, was born in 1895. His parents were William Clench and Maggie Broderick, and they married in 1892. Henry seemed to be an only child of that marriage, but I noticed that his father, William, was actually 37 at the time of that marriage. And when you see someone who is that age getting married, you think there's always the possibility they may have been married before. So I had a look earlier in time and actually found that William had been married before, and he'd had 7 children from his first wife. The children of William Clench's first marriage were half-blood brothers and sisters to the deceased father, Henry Clench.
This was an important discovery. As there were half-blood siblings on John Clench's father's side, Saul had to now explore the maternal side, because if John's mother Minnie had any living full-blood relatives, they would be the rightful heirs to any inheritance over and above half-blood relatives.
So this is the Hardcastle tree that we've drawn up. So this is the deceased mother's side. So she was Minnie Hardcastle. She was born in 1896. She was one of 5 children of Benjamin Hardcastle and Mary Ann Walton. And they turn up on the 1901 census here.
Discovering Minnie had siblings was a breakthrough for Saul. These were full-blood relatives of John Clench, which meant if they had descendants, Saul could stop investigating John's father Henry's family tree. And interestingly, when looking into the maternal tree, Saul and his team discovered something rather fascinating about John's grandfather.
And you notice that Benjamin Hardcastle, who was the deceased grandfather, his occupation was a cabinet maker. We found that there were 3 generations of cabinet makers in this family. There was Benjamin and 2 of his sons and one of his grandsons as well.
Would this information impact the value of the case or throw up any leads? It appears that Benjamin Hardcastle was a shrewd businessman. His firm evolved from a cabinet maker's into a lucrative funeral director's, employing many members of his family. It wasn't unusual for woodworkers to move in this direction.
Cabinet makers would probably have had a loyal clientele simply through providing wooden goods to people in a community. And so it was a logical step to move into the craft of undertaking, simply as they were halfway there already.
When he first started out in the trade, Benjamin Hardcastle would probably have continued to run both businesses hand in hand.
The 19th century undertaker cabinet maker, when they started in business, would probably have been only doing a few funerals each month. As we move through the 19th century, we see not only the population grow, but also the number of deaths expand.
This meant the business of arranging funerals became more commonplace.
By the end of the 19th century, so let's say the last quarter, we see the emergence of the departmental stores, particularly in the urban areas, and many offered a service of from the cradle to the grave.
Benjamin Hardcastle's successful family-run company was still listed in the British Undertaker's Yearbook in 1919, the year before he died. And the discovery of a number of John Clench's relatives working in the family business made it easier to grow his maternal family tree. They could pin down the correct family members by including their job titles when searching the records. This led Saul to a key discovery. John's mother, Minnie, had 4 siblings who had produced a number of children. John had 8 first cousins, so they, or their descendants, would all be rightful heirs. Saul knew that if he could contact them quickly, the case would be all sewn up and it would be job done. But there was a big obstacle in the way.
We'd identified 13 heirs on the maternal side, and we signed up 12 of them, but there was 1 still outstanding. This was a lady named Clover, very unusual name. She was the daughter of the deceased uncle, Wilfred Hardcastle.
Clover was the last piece of the puzzle, and Saul was desperate to speak to her. She was approaching 90, and frustratingly for Saul, was proving impossible to pin down.
Pick up the phone, and I ring her and I explain who I am. And she goes, "No, thank you, no, not today, thank you very much," and she puts the phone down.
Eventually, Saul's perseverance paid off, and after writing to the elderly Clover, explaining clearly why he was trying to get in touch, she agreed to speak to him on the phone. But little did he expect what she had to say. Clover revealed a hidden family secret that meant all of his work up to this point was for nothing, and he'd have to go back to the drawing board.
It was only when we spoke to Clover that she told us something that turned this entire case on its head instantly.
Each case taken on by the heir hunters comes with huge hidden risks. Stepping out into the unknown, they never know what return they'll get for their efforts when they begin their search for heirs. And as they set out on that journey, family histories unfold which tell remarkable truths about the past. Sometimes a perfectly ordinary person can lead back to a surprising ancestor. In London, probate researchers Fraser and Fraser have taken on one such case with the estate of retired plant operator Roy Rogerson. His name appeared on the government's bona vacantia list of unclaimed estates after he died in Stoke-on-Trent in January 2017 at the age of 72. He had no will and no known family in his life.
When we have a case advertised by the government legal department and it has value, we have to make sure that we're on our game. If a case has value, you are pretty much sure that someone else is going to be looking into it.
Little was known about Roy's family history, but the friends who'd known him for over 45 years at his beloved cricket club were able to give some insight into the man he was.
I've known him from 1964. He was a strange guy, really. He was very much of a loner, kept himself to himself.
First impressions of Roy were that he was a little bit kind of standoffish. His main interest and passion was cricket. Not just playing, but watching.
He never used to come into the club and socialise. He used to bring his own sandwiches, his own drink.
Is he on this one?
I think we'd all worked out that he'd got a fair amount of money stashed away somewhere because he worked all his life. He was never married. He never had a mortgage. You know, he hardly ever went on holidays. You know, all the things that we spend money on, Roy didn't.
In the office, with a sense there would be a lot of money at stake, Ben started looking into Roy's file. He knew that if there was property involved, it could be a substantial estate.
So initially, the case of Roy Rogerson, we weren't sure whether it had any value. The deceased died in a nursing home. It was only when we looked further, a little bit deeper into the case, that we realised that his birth had been mistranscribed and he actually had owned a property. Further checks revealed that he still owned that property, and it was all hands on deck for research.
Hi, Ish. Hi. This is the case of Roy Rogerson. We believe there to be a property on there. Initial inquiries say that he's an only child.
Oh, brilliant.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Although they knew Roy had no siblings, Isha's first task was to check if his parents had been married before, which could mean half-brothers or sisters.
From the marriage here, we know they're married on the 1st of November 1943 in Stoke-on-Trent. The father is Joseph Rogerson, which we knew already. He's 41 and a bachelor. And Phyllis is 23 and a spinster. So from this marriage, we know for certain that neither parents were married before, so we know that there will be no half-blood.
With the confirmation that Roy had no full or half-blood siblings, the search would need to move on to aunts and uncles. Isha began by looking into Roy's mother, Phyllis Poley's side of the family. And what she discovered helped narrow down her search for heirs of what could be a high-value estate.
We know that her father was Arthur Poley. When I did a birth search for Phyllis, we knew that her mother's maiden name was Watson. So we did a Poley to Watson birth search, and we found that Phyllis was the only one. So therefore we could rule out the maternal side, as she would be an only child.
Bad news for the hunt, as this meant there would be no heirs at all on that side of the family. So everything would now hinge on Roy's father's side, where the search was on in earnest.
We've got more manpower, basically, for that one side, rather than both sides having more names.
The next step for Isha was to work her way up Roy's paternal family tree to trace his grandparents. This would eventually reveal if Roy's father had any siblings, which could ultimately lead to living heirs. Isha's starting point was Roy's parents' marriage certificate, which led her to the census to confirm who Roy's paternal grandparents were.
I found a 1911 census, and as you can see, the dad is Robert Henry Rogerson, age 36, and Joseph Rogerson is age 8, and Joseph's mum is called Sarah Ann.
When researching the paternal tree, some interesting information about Roy's grandfather, Robert Henry Rogerson, came to light. This would be the glue that held the research together.
So, Isha, I'm intrigued. What have you found out?
So when we were looking into Roy's family, we noticed on his grandfather's marriage certificate, which has a fascinating occupation on it.
Oh, railway policeman. And where are we? 1896, Victoria still on the throne. Suppose it was the olden day equivalent of the British Transport Police.
Yeah, that's what you'd imagine.
That's rather exotic. And what else did you find out about his grandfather?
So when we're going through, we see a bit of a promotion going on. So we've got his marriage certificate in 1896. In 1902, on his son's birth certificate, he's become a railway detective.
Oh, now, railway detective sounds very mysterious,
It
doesn't it?
does
Sounds
sound
very Victorian crime novel.
And then it gets better. We've got the marriage of his son, and then he becomes a railway police sergeant.
Oh, so he gets promoted.
So, yeah, it looks like that again.
Gosh, how can something like this, you know, something a bit out of the ordinary, I mean, you haven't come across this many times, have you?
No, well, when you've got a very common name, that's kind of the time where you would look at the occupation. When you've got something like a railway detective, you could say, yeah, that's going to be the guy, because it's not very often you'd come across that.
So somebody that says railway detective, that helps you narrow it down a lot?
Well, yeah, I've never come across that before.
Oh, so it's going to help?
Yeah, definitely.
From searching the records, the team were able to establish that Robert Henry Rogerson joined the force at an exciting time. Railway police had only been in existence since the 1820s and had already seen many changes. As new railway companies started up, they would in turn form their own police units.
There were two reasons railways set up police forces. The first was during the building of the line. There was a feeling that the people who built the line, the navvies, were unruly drunkards who would steal and fight and cause damage to the local population. The second reason is because they carried millions of tons of goods every single year, so you needed to protect everything that was moving through the railway system.
Later in the 19th century, the force expanded to include railway detectives.
What happens is that many companies adopt detective forces from the 1860s, and this is a group of employees amongst the police that are considered the elite. Some crime has been committed on the railway, an assault perhaps. They would investigate that after that's been reported by the constables, the everyday policemen on the beat.
As the records revealed, Robert Rogerson worked his way up the ranks of the railway police force to become detective.
Robert, as a railway detective, would have been part of the North Eastern Railways police force. Now, this was one of the most well-respected police forces in the country.
Robert was in an extremely esteemed role. He was one of only 7 detectives working in his region, and such responsibility came with rewards.
It was well paid. He would have been on around 29 shillings per week, which equates to about £75 a year. But when he went up to detective sergeant, he would have been on about 33 shillings.
Back in the office, Roy's grandfather Robert's unusual job would come in handy while combing through records in the search for Roy's heirs. The question the team needed to answer was, did Robert and his wife Sarah Ann have more children other than Roy's father, Joseph? If there were more children, these would be aunts and uncles of Roy's and would be the first positive lead in the hunt for beneficiaries of his valuable estate.
Every year in Britain, thousands of ordinary people get an unexpected knock on the door from heir hunters.
I had no idea that we had a branch of the family that we knew nothing about.
Over the years, the heir hunters have given fortunes to the heirs that they find. As well as the unexpected windfalls, they also reunite relatives.
The more I looked into it, I thought, oh my God, it's amazing.
There are still hundreds of estates left unclaimed. Listen carefully for the names. If you recognise yours, then one of them could rightfully belong to you.
Today, we've got details of 2 estates on the Government Legal Department's unclaimed estates list. The first case is William Henry Barrett. William died on the 19th of June 2003 in Aylesbury, Buckinghamshire, aged 91. He married Evelyn Annie Barrett, née Painter, on the 28th of November 1975. William was born in Hartlepool, Cleveland, in 1912. Perhaps you're part of William's family of Barrett. Could you be the person the heir hunters are looking for? The next case is of Annie Lewis, who died aged 94 on the 19th of August 1992 in South Pembrokeshire, Dyfed. Annie was born on the 17th of August 1897 in Oswestry, Shropshire, and her maiden name was Owen. She married Thomas Henry Lewis on the 11th of March 1934. If you share Annie's family name, perhaps you're her relative.
If so, the windfall could be coming your way.
In Merseyside, case manager Saul Marks from Celtic Research was investigating the case of John Clench, a widower who died aged 84 in Birmingham. At the time, he was living in a care home.
He was always happy. He was always happy to see us. We'd never had another one like him, have we? No. Ah, Johnny.
While working on John's family tree in the search for beneficiaries of his estate, Saul discovered numerous half-blood siblings on the paternal side, leading to heirs. But when 13 living descendants of full-blood aunts and uncles on his mother's side were found, the half-blood relatives were no longer entitled.
There was no point in us continuing the research on the Clench family at this point, because if there were full-blood relations on the maternal side, which was the Hardcastle side, then these Clenches wouldn't inherit, and we'd be wasting our time.
After signing up 12 of the heirs, there was just one outstanding, John's cousin Clover. Saul believed her to be the daughter of John's uncle Wilfred, his mother Minnie's older brother. But when Saul finally spoke to Clover, he wasn't prepared for what she was about to tell him, something which would turn the entire case on its head.
What did you learn from Clover?
Well, Clover told us something so dramatic and so vital to the research in this case, it turned all the research on its head and dropped it basically in the dustbin in one fell swoop.
What was it?
Well, what she said was, I was not the biological daughter of Wilfred Hardcastle. I knew that Clover, although she was born as a Hardcastle, married under the name Fowler. And I'd kind of deduced that Clover's mother had got together with this chap named George Fowler. But my assumption, she was still entitled because she was Wilfred's daughter and she's just taken her stepfather's name like many people do. And she said, no, that wasn't the case. I was George Fowler's daughter. I wasn't Wilfred Hardcastle's daughter at all.
So that rules her out completely?
Yes, he hadn't had a daughter called Clover at all. Clover was the product of his wife's affair with George Fowler.
So did that make that a dead end?
Well, it didn't actually, because what she said in the course of conversation is, oh, my sister would have known more. And I was like, hang on, what sister?
Yeah.
There isn't a sister as far as we're aware. And she said, well, we called each other sisters. I was brought up with her. But Vera was actually not my sister at all. What she said is, Vera was the illegitimate daughter of one of Wilfrid Hardcastle's sisters.
I mean, let me get this straight in my own mind. If this Vera, that we've suddenly come out of nowhere, was the illegitimate child of one of Wilfrid's sisters, then it's either actually John Clench, the deceased's mother, or the other sister, or Annie. So there's a 50-50 chance that actually she might be much more closely biologically connected with the deceased than anybody would have thought.
Exactly. I mean, the next step for us was to speak to Vera's son and establish which of these sisters it was. So I spoke to the son, and he came up with this letter, absolute gem of a record. And this was the letter from Wilfrid Hardcastle's sister, basically relinquishing claim of the child, giving her child to her brother Wilfrid and his wife.
So Vera was John Clench's half-sister, completely out of the blue, and that takes precedence over all the other people that you had sorted out as potential heirs.
Yeah, and we had to go back to the other cousins who we'd been off to sign and everything and say, awfully sorry, you're not heirs at all.
My goodness, so the whole thing gets thrown up in the air because you find somebody you didn't even know existed.
Absolutely. It was completely, we had done all the work on this case and we thought, there's just one more person to sign, get it boxed off and done, that case is finished. And suddenly the case is wide open again and it's got a completely different look to it from how it did before.
Clover was no longer an heir to John Clench's estate. Vera, the sister she grew up with, was given away by her biological mother, Minnie, and she came to live with Clover and her parents, Wilfrid and Rebecca. Today, she's being visited by Vera's son, David, and she explains how Vera came to live with her family after World War I.
Well, her father was in the forces and he got killed in the 1914 war. And her mother didn't want her. And my mother, she used to look after her. And eventually, she said to her mother, make up your mind whether you want her. If not, I'm having her. So my mother adopted her. And as far as I know, her mother, well, she left Leeds. And she got married and she has a family. But that's all we knew of her mother.
Minnie was never married to Vera's father. And after his death, Vera was unofficially adopted by her uncle Wilfrid, Minnie's brother, and Aunt Rebecca. This was the turning point in the case and finally led Saul to the heirs of John Clench's estate, his half-sister Vera's descendants.
The deceased sister Vera actually passed away in 2003, but she had married and had twin sons, David and Derek. When I spoke at length to David, he explained that Derek, his twin, had sadly also passed away, but he left two sons who were his nephews and therefore Vera's grandchildren. So it turned out that there are simply three heirs to this estate, Vera's son and her two grandsons.
Finally, a rightful heir. David Bugg is Clover's nephew, the son of her adopted sister Vera. He's the grandson Minnie never knew, and he has some fascinating paperwork that confirms his mother Vera's adoption.
I, Minnie Hardcastle, do hereby agree that my brother, Wilfrid Hardcastle, shall have the sole adoption of my daughter Vera. At the same time, I acknowledge Vera as my child, and as such will benefit as any other child or children I may have at the time of my death.
When Rebecca May left Wilfrid for George, she took Vera with her.
My sister was adopted from being about 3 months old. And my mother always said she was just like her own.
Vera's mother, Minnie, was supposedly engaged to her lover when he went to war, leaving her on her own, pregnant and unable to look after her child. The situation Minnie found herself in was something that happened frequently then, but often behind closed doors.
It wasn't uncommon, as far as we know, for family members to informally adopt children because there was no legal procedure for adopting children before 1926. In 1927, it was possible to go through a legal adoption process. The adopted parents then became the parents. but it wasn't obligatory. It wasn't until 1949 that it became obligatory to go through a legal process before an adoption was recognised.
Minnie didn't have all the choices available today, and her informal letter asking her brother and his wife if they could bring up her child shows concern for her daughter.
It's so interesting that she's acknowledging Vera as her child and says she'll benefit like any other child or children at the time of her death. The child has a right to inherit because, again, illegitimate children had no legal status, and if the mother died intestate, then they didn't automatically inherit the way that legitimate children would.
Although Minnie put this in place for Vera in her letter to her brother Wilfred, Vera had no contact with her birth mother throughout her life, so didn't inherit from her when she died in 1955.
As wonderful and as atmospheric as this letter was, it didn't actually have any bearing legally, and it meant that Vera was still regarded as Minnie's child and therefore still the half-sister of John Clench.
Life goes, don't it?
Vera's son and John Clench's rightful heir David may have been brought up as Clover's nephew, but because his mother Vera was adopted, they're not blood relatives.
Vera. Vera Hardcastle.
And he was just as taken aback as Clover when all the facts came to light, and he learned that it was actually he and his brother's family who were beneficiaries.
We read about it happening all the time to other people, but it never happened to me before. Tell her what time you had to come here.
Today, David and one of his nephews, Daniel, 2 of John's 3 beneficiaries, are joining other family members to celebrate their Aunt Clover's 90th birthday at her care home in Beverley.
Finding out about the family, it's been really interesting. Things I didn't know, you know, because we didn't talk about.
David's nephew, Daniel, was also taken aback by his unexpected inheritance.
It's quite mind-blowing to inherit money from someone you don't know. I'm still not quite sure how I feel about it. It's like this man who I know nothing about. I kind of wish I did know him. But in a way, it's also sad that he had no one to leave it to.
What an intriguing case with all those twists and turns. And after so many false leads, how gratifying to have finally found John Clench's 3 rightful heirs, all with a stake in what turned out to be a significant inheritance.
Ultimately, we're really pleased that this case has reached a very satisfactory conclusion. The other element is that when we heard back from the bank about what the value of the asset was, they said it was about £46,000. So the heirs will all be inheriting a reasonable amount of money. So it's been a very interesting case. On to the next one.
Birthday, Clover. Happy birthday to you.
Hip hip.
Hooray!
Hip hip.
Hooray!
Hip hip.
Hooray!
I'm at the probate genealogist firm Fraser & Fraser in London, where the team have been working on the competitive and potentially high-value case of Roy Rogerson. Roy, a lifelong and passionate cricket fan, died in Stoke-on-Trent in January 2017, aged 73. He left no will, he had no known next of kin, but with a reputation for being careful with his money, he was believed to have left a sizable estate, including a property.
Initial research revealed that Roy's mother was an only child, so there would be no heirs on her side of the family. This left case manager Ben Cornish and his team to concentrate on trying to trace potential beneficiaries on the paternal side.
When we confirm that there are no heirs on one side of the estate, it's a little bit worrying for us initially because we think, well, maybe there aren't going to be any heirs on the whole estate. But it's also good for us because it doesn't mean that we have to trace so many individuals, and we can just focus all our resources onto one side.
Although Roy had no family around him, he had friendships spanning over 40 years, cemented at the cricket club he loved.
I think it's 3 years ago he was actually made a life member at the cricket club. So he was well thought of at the club.
He was very, very witty and very quick. Dry sense of humour. Funny guy.
After delving into Roy's father's side of the family, the team had discovered that his grandfather had a fascinating career as a railway detective. This unusual job would help pin him down when researching the records. All hope now rested on whether he and Roy's grandmother Sarah had more children in addition to Roy's father Joseph. If they had, these aunts and uncles of Roy's, or their descendants, would be the heirs the team was so desperately looking for. And they were in luck.
So looking at the 1901 census, there were 3 children. But we knew that Joseph was born in 1902 anyway, so he wouldn't have been on it. So from the 11, we know they had 4 children.
This was a great find. 3 paternal aunts and uncles of Roy's. If they'd married and had children of their own, there could be heirs to inherit this valuable estate. Isha began by looking at one of Joseph's older brothers and inched nearer to the breakthrough she'd been waiting for.
John James Rogerson married Elsie Winifred Hindmarch in 1922. They went on to have Betty Rogerson, who married Francis Gallen, and they had 3 children who were our first 3 heirs on this case.
With details of 3 potential heirs discovered, Isha had to act fast. Competitors would most likely be working the same case, so she contacted one of her travelling researchers to ask him to hit the road in a bid to sign up the heirs.
Would you be able to go and see some people? We've got a new case that's valuable, it's got a house on it, and we've got heirs in the northeast that we'd like you to go and see.
With no time to waste, Isha next looked at Joseph's sister's family line.
So, with Mary Rogerson's stem, she married twice.
And Mary's second marriage produced a son, who in turn produced 3 children, who would also be heirs. There was now just one more uncle left to research, the younger of Roy's 2 brothers. And when Isha looked into the certificate, she found what she was hoping for.
Joseph's youngest brother, Henry Rogerson, also married and had children.
In fact, Henry Rogerson had gone on to marry Florence Elizabeth Saul in 1926, and they had 3 children of their own. The team had made contact with their first heirs. Henry's 86-year-old son, Harry Rogerson, as well as Henry's 3 granddaughters. They're all cousins of Roy's. And news of the man who was to pass on a windfall came as a bolt out of the blue.
I was so surprised. I didn't even know about Roy. I'd never heard his name before.
My mum's dad died when she was kind of really, really young, just a baby, I think 3 weeks old. And I don't think my grandma kept in touch with that side of the family at all. She never talked about them to us, so we just didn't know they existed.
I'm not even sure maybe my mum was even aware she had a cousin called Roy, but absolutely loved to discover more about that part of the family. Yeah, it's quite interesting. Some of them I've never seen before.
The sisters are thrilled they now have a whole new chapter of their family opened up to them.
So this is all we've actually got, really, isn't it?
And fueled by news of a previously unknown extended family, Roy Rogerson's cousins have come to the Darlington Steam Museum to meet David Turner, to learn about the career of their great-grandfather Robert Rogerson, railway detective.
So this is a big freight locomotive that would use.
David has a copy of a rule book that Robert would have had in his possession, which gives a fascinating insight into his daily routine.
And there are some really interesting things in here. This one's particularly good. When investigating cases, the utmost care must be exercised in eliciting information and in the taking of evidence. The officer must satisfy himself that the informant is in a position to verify on oath the statement made.
So was there many railway detectives?
Around the time he's working, the company in question, the North Eastern Railway, had, I think, about 40 to 50,000 railway employees, but there were only 296 police officers, including your great-grandfather, and there were only 20 detectives on the entire railway.
Some people pretty sought-after job.
Sought after. I would say he was one of the elite of the police service.
There was a vast area for the railway police to patrol. In the 1890s, the railway network consisted of around 20,000 miles of line. Roberts Beat, the North Eastern Railway, was primarily used to transport coal from the mines to London.
Of course, he would have to work on the platforms, in the stations, in the booking offices, talking to people. But actually, because goods went missing much more often, but it would mean getting down at track level to actually stand on the track. If somebody's crawling through a goods yard trying to steal things from it, the evidence is probably going to be all around footprints. So he would have to crawl, perhaps, under wagons, under locomotives, to really get to the heart of the case, get to the evidence.
He must have been really fit to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think he would have to have been quite a fit and healthy individual.
Yeah, I think it's quite fascinating, quite unusual, really, so yes.
It gives me a real feel for him and the kind of person that he must have been to do a job like that.
It was a real surprise because I'd never heard of railway detectives before.
To hear David talk and learn about our great-grandfather has just been fantastic.
In the office, Roy's grandfather Robert Rogerson's enthralling career had helped Ben and his team beat the competition and sign up 10 heirs of Roy's.
We worked really hard to locate the beneficiaries. Because there was a value, there was a property, we had to make sure that our research was correct and that we were the first of the beneficiaries. We subsequently found out that property could be worth between £50,000 and £100,000. We also believe that there are some monies in a bank account, and there is potentially an investment worth over £200,000. So it was a large estate, and it was a job well done.
Not only were Ben and his team happy with the results, Roy's heirs would each be getting a substantial inheritance and the gift of learning more about their family.
Just trying to comprehend it all, really, and make sense of it, isn't it?
Yeah, the size of that second family that we just knew nothing about.
Roy's family may never have known him, but his friends were there to see him off.
We had known him for so long. Yeah, so I think it was important that we went along, obviously, to his funeral.
So I think if he was sitting on one of the bar stools in here today, I'd be saying, Roy, it's your round.
What an intriguing case Roy Rogerson's was. Bit of a loner, passion for cricket, who left a generous estate because he was so careful with cash. And his exciting grandfather's profession has left the relatives he never knew with a colourful family history. So, with another case tied up, where next for the heir hunters? Maybe it could be you getting an unexpected knock on the door. Until next time, goodbye.